According to Cheryl Hamilton's textbook, The Art of Public Speaking, she stated that one of the number one fears individuals have is that of public speaking. Yes, I get a little anxious when it's time for me to give a presentation, but I find it exhilarating. I have this gift. I noticed that whenever I was in the United States Army, that whenever I start to talk, it is almost as though the audience is in this trance. And so I realized that once I got out of the Army, I could use my gift of public speaking to make a living and, more importantly, help people. That is why I'm here. Good morning, everybody. My name is Ray Whitlow, and I'm here to tell you about my career as an instructor of speech here at Lee College. I will do so in 3 points. Point number 1, I will ultimately tell you why I decided to go into public speaking. Point number 2, I will go over the education that I needed to get into public speaking. And point number 3, my job here at Lee College as an instructor of speech. My executive summary, I was an adjunct instructor back in 1995. And when I stepped foot on this campus, I knew that I wanted to work here full-time as an instructor of speech, and the pay range is anywhere between $60,000 and $100,000, depending on how long you've been here, and I've accomplished that. Before I move on to my body, I'm going to stop and ask, are there any questions on what I've gone over so far? Yes?
Do we have to say good morning?
You don't have to say good morning, just somehow greet the audience somehow. But that's a fair question, yes.
Why Lee College and why not another college?
That is a very good question. In the beginning, because I'm from Baytown and the mentality back then is probably still the same thing. Once you graduate, you want to leave. So I originally wanted to go to HCC or Lone Star, but they wouldn't hire me. And so whenever I came here and I accepted the fact that I'm in Baytown, I loved it because I can relate to the people because I went to junior high and high school here. So Baytown, because I grew up here. Very good question. More questions. More questions. One more question before I move on to my body. One more question. One more question.
How many steps
I'm sorry, go ahead.
How many steps and challenges did it take for you to get to where you're at right now?
Very good question. And so I started as an adjunct in 1995, and that's when I realized that I wanted to be an instructor of speech. Typically, particularly instructors here, they love their jobs and there are not a lot of openings. I've been here for 20 years and that's the norm because people love what they do. So after adjuncting at Lee College, I had to go and adjunct at University of Houston 2 classes, and it was like 5 years before I actually became a full-time instructor here. So I got my job in like 2000, 2001, 2002. I think there was a question.
I was going to ask the same thing basically, so she covered it.
Okay. All right. That said, I'm going to move on to my first point, why I decided to go into public speaking. My mom, God rest her soul, she passed away in 2018, and she is the reason that I am the person, the man that I am today. Growing up, my mom told me that she never did the baby talk because it was just me and my mom. She never did the gaga goo-goo. She always spoke to me as an adult. John Smith, in his article, How to Get Your Child to Speak at a Young Age, he said, don't do the baby talk because babies will mimic you. So if you talk like a baby, that's what a baby will do. If you speak like an adult, then the child will mimic you. And that's exactly what happened. I can remember growing up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and then my mom told me this story, and I vaguely remember it. We were at a restaurant, and I was just walking around talking to people randomly about my favorite topic, which consisted of the Minnesota Vikings. And my mom told me I was talking to this one guy, and I just grabbed a French fry off of his plate, and I ate it. And I go, this is pretty good. It was very nice talking to you. And so my mom was mortified, but the gentleman said, no, your child is so encapsulating. He just speaks so well, and that's because my mom said, growing up, I always speak to him like an adult, never let him hold his head down, don't let him split verbs, I don't let him mumble. And so that's why I developed the gift of public speaking at a young age, because my mom was my first speech teacher. But the one thing that helped me to realize that I indeed had this gift was when I went into the United States Army and I had to go to the Sergeant E5 board. In order to make rank in the United States Army, you have to excel. And one thing that you have to excel in is this verbal board. It's very formal. They ask you a bunch of questions such as, what are the 3 colors, or rather, what are the 3 settings on the M16? Sergeant Major, the 3 settings are safe, semi-automatic, automatic. What is the maximum effective range of an M16? Sergeant, the maximum effective range is 350 meters. The highest score you can make when I was in was a 200. If a soldier came back with a 170, 175, he or she was doing an outstanding job. out of a possible 200 points, I made 199. I kind of flubbed the military police code of conduct, which was ironic because I knew that like the back of my hand. They literally begged me to stay in the military. I realized if a bunch of hardened non-commissioned officers that had been in the Vietnam War, the Korean War, if they were impressed with my communication skills, indeed I had a gift, and I decided to take a chance, get out, and go to the University of Houston and major in speech. So before I move on to my second point, questions, yes.
What exactly were you doing in the military?
Very good question. I was a military police officer. And so my mindset in becoming a military police officer, because originally I didn't think I was college material. And so I joined the military so that I would be a productive citizen. And I wanted to do a job that I could do when I got out of the Army. And so mindset, military police officer. If I decided to get out, I could come back to Houston and become an HPD officer. So that's why I chose a military police officer. Very good question.
If your mom wasn't the way that she was with you, do you think you would have chosen the career path that you did?
No. And ironically, my mom thought I was going to go to college. She told me that you had to leave the house when I was 18 years old because she had to go and get heart surgery. She thought I was going to go to college. And she was very adamant, you have to leave. I didn't think I was college material because I didn't really do well on my SAT test. And so after a while, I thought I can join the military. I'll be a productive citizen. I'll have school for the education if I so choose. And I will basically have a job that I can stay in for like 20 years and retire. Only after I got out did my mom said, I did not want you to go to the Army. I didn't think you were going to do that. But because I told you to leave and you had a plan, I had to let you go. So yes, I was successful and I joined the Army because of my mom, but my mom did not want me to join the Army. She didn't want her baby to go off to war. Very good question. Another question. All right, let me move on to my second point. I've taken many classes here I took many classes at the University of Houston, but one of my favorite classes consisted of persuasion. And according to Aristotle, the art of rhetoric, who is considered a father of public speaking, he said that in order to persuade the audience, there are three concepts that he coined. One, ethos. Basically, in order to persuade the audience has to trust you. And you can do things to become trustworthy by simply showing your hands. You can also practice and prepare because individuals can tell if you're not prepared. And if you aren't, they feel like you're wasting our time. You can also do things such as just look the prop. Normally, whenever I give a presentation, I have a suit on. I make certain that I don't sway. I just look professional. Another concept consists of logos, logical appears. You have to back up what you say with sources, with facts. That is why I cite sources within the speech. According to John Freeman, his book, Egypt, Greece, and Rome, he basically said that one thing that Aristotle said that you could do to gain some logos in the presentation is basically cite your sources like I am doing as I give this presentation. But the third, and I think the most effective thing that I do is pathos. That consists of logical appeals. When you speak, you have to ultimately tug at the heartstrings of the audience. And this is a small sample of a motivational speech, which I will give in its entirety a little later on in the semester. And it goes something like this. I would rather be dead with my loved ones weeping over my lifeless body, but reminiscing when I was alive, I stood for honor, truth, and justice. That is a more preferred fate than to be alive and have my hands soiled with the blood of innocent men, women, and children because I chose to shed it for my own selfish gain. I do believe I use pathos quite effectively, and that makes me a pretty effective public speaker. Before I move on to my next point, more questions.
Did you take a class like this in school?
At University of Houston?
Yeah.
Yes, I took a Fundamentals of Public Speaking class at the University of Houston. In fact, I based this class off of my class back at the University of Houston that I took in 1988. It's pretty much the same because it's a core class. So yes, I took this class as well as many other speech classes because my major was speech communication.
And you got good grades the whole time?
Yes. In all of my public speaking classes, I was the number one speaker, but ironically, I was the number one speaker, and because I did not do well on the written final test, I made a B, and that was the highest grade in the class. But every public speaking class that I have taken in the University of Houston, I was always the number one speaker. Okay. More questions, yes.
What was the worst speech you think you've ever given, if there is one?
I think the worst speech, and it's relative, I get tongue twisted at times. And so when I was in advanced public speaking, I was giving a speech on the Apostle Paul as he was giving a speech to the people of the day. And I got really tongue twisted and I kind of got things confused. But you really can't mess up unless you stop and say, I've messed up. But that was probably the worst presentation that I gave because I just got tongue twisted and I got sort of out of sequence. Good question. One other question before I move on to, yes.
What age did you begin at the University of Houston?
Very good question. So I joined the Army when I was 17 and I actually left when I was 18. 3 years in the Army, I got out at 21. I got out like July of 1987 and I started University of Houston in August. So I was 21 whenever I started my undergraduate degree. I finished when I was 24. I got a 4-year degree in 3 years. I took off a year and then I started my master's program at about 26. And then I finished when I was about 28 or 29. Okay. One other question? I think I said one and then I was going to move on, but if there's a burning question. All right, let me move on to my third and final point, my job here at Lee College. Currently, I am an instructor of speech, and I'm also the chair of the department. Let me go over being a full-time faculty member. According to Amanda Summers and the Lee College Handbook, in order to be considered a full-time faculty member on the academic side, you have to have 15 graduate hours in the discipline that you want to teach. So I have a master's in speech communication. That consists of 30 hours altogether. And within those 30 hours, I have 15 graduate hours in speech communication classes, such as advanced public speaking, theories of human communication, crisis communication. My thesis basically was on a gentleman trying to end slavery by giving presentations. However, if I want to teach history, I don't have to go and get another master's in history. I just have to go and get 15 graduate hours in history. Then I can teach a history class. If I want to teach Spanish, I just have to get 15 graduate hours in Spanish. So once you have your master's, you just have to have 15 graduate hours in the discipline that you want to teach. The average starting pay for someone just starting at a community college is probably between $55,000 and $65,000. And that's just if you teach 15 hours in the spring and 15 hours in the fall. You don't have to teach summer school. But if you teach summer school, you make more money. If you teach in the mini session, you make more money. If you teach more than 15 hours, like 15 hours, that's 5 classes. If you teach 6 classes, that's more money. If you teach 7 classes, they don't want you to teach over 7 classes because this is a lot, but it's more money. So the more money or the more classes you take, the more money you make. I am also the chair of the department. So that means I just handle administrative duties. I make certain that everybody in my department, they get their schedule to me. I'm the chair of the Spanish department. I'm not fluent in Spanish, but because I'm the chair and I have a minor in Spanish, I'm proficient. In fact, I'm heading off to Brazil, and my boss said that there was a guy there that needed a Spanish interpreter. He goes, Mr. Whitlow is fluent. I go, okay, I guess I probably better brush up on my Spanish so that I'm fluent. But I think that I can do quite well. And I'm also the chair of the teacher education department. One of the things I don't like about being chair is handling student complaints. They're inevitable. What I tell a student that comes to me that is complaining about one of my instructors, first go to the instructor. 9 times out of 10, the instructor doesn't know that there's a complaint. And if you don't know that there's a complaint, you can't address it. So ultimately, go to the instructor, address the situation. If you still can't resolve it, then come to me. I think together, myself, the instructor, and you, we can all resolve the issue. But if you still have an issue, you can go to the vice president, to the provost, and ultimately to the president. But 95% of the time, the situation is resolved when the instructor is informed by the student. Questions before I move on to my recommendation. Questions. Questions at all on my job here at Lee College? One or two questions before we move on. Yes.
When it gets hard or difficult, how come you don't just give up? Like, what drives you?
Well, because I love my job. I absolutely love my job. Very good question. I am the chair of the department. I do it because somebody has to do it. But ultimately, this is my true love. I will never become an administrator. I will never, and they've said, hey, why don't you become a dean? Why don't you go and become, I will never have a job where I don't teach. And so what keeps me motivated is this right here. I love being able to impart the knowledge that I have to any other individuals, and they can be confident public speakers too. So I keep going because of you guys. Very good question. Yes.
What? Okay. I just raised my hand a little bit, but would you ever transfer anywhere else?
Very good question. No. No. It's ironic because I did not want to work at Lee College because I was from Baytown. But now that I'm here, I don't even have a resume updated. I have no plans of having any other job besides this job. My plans are, because technically, I'm 56 years old, technically I can retire in a year. I can. I'm not, because I can just work in the spring and in the fall. I can work 7.5 months and make my full salary. Travel, do whatever I want to do, have all of my insurance. I only work 4 days a week. I don't work on Fridays. And in the summertime, if I have a hybrid class, it's less than that. So as long as I'm effective, if I come into the classroom and I feel like I am not conveying my knowledge to the audience, then I am no longer effective. That's when I'll think about retiring. But as long as I'm effective, I will continue to work here at Lee College, although be it in a lesser capacity, just work in the spring and the fall, teach my classes and have the summers off. More questions? What other questions before I move on to the recommendation?
Would you ever write a book?
I have written a book. I have actually written 3 books. One was my thesis. It was 150 pages, and so I consider that a book. I've written a novel, a fiction novel called A Vision of Hope. It is about an individual who, it is totally fiction, but it's based on me to a certain degree, an individual who was raised in the North, but came to the South. And when he wanted to find a wife, his African-American parents really pressured him to marry an African-American female. The argument was so that you can advance the African-American race, but because he was raised in Minneapolis, Minnesota, or rather in Iowa, he was attracted to all females, and ultimately he wanted to go out with someone that was not black, and the way that he could resolve this was to go out with a biracial individual, and then it goes to the tragedy because this biracial individual hated the African-American her, and hated the white in her, and then she was dating a guy that ultimately was like a hardcore African American, but he ultimately hated the Caucasian that was in her. And so then I write on the conflict, the racial conflict. Because I'm a little older than you, I grew up during the civil rights movement. When I was in Minneapolis, Minnesota, every day I got called the N-word. Every single day. Every single day. And so growing up and seeing the division between black and white, I grew up in Baytown. In Baytown, I left for the Army in 1984. There was no such thing as interracial dating. It did not happen. It just didn't. By the time I came back in 1987, it's like they lifted the ban. Everything changed. And so things have changed a great deal. And so I started writing that book, or I wrote that book, because of the racial trauma that I dealt with growing up as a child. And then I've written one other book. It's a biblical book on ultimately we are parents' children. The argument is that men tend to be irresponsible and women tend to be manipulative, and ultimately I'm basing this off of the Garden of Eden, where Eve was manipulated by the serpent to eat the snake, or rather to eat the apple, and Adam was right there. All he had to do was say, no, don't eat it, but he did not, so he was irresponsible. And from that, I just go to show you characters. David was very irresponsible. Other females that were manipulative. Sarah manipulated her husband. Hey, I want a child, but I'm too old, so sleep with my maidservant. And that just caused problems. And so I just kind of ultimately extract that out to don't do that. Don't be manipulative and be responsible. So, have I ever considered writing a book? I've written 3.
I did.
So, no, because the novel is I don't want to get canceled.
Okay.
It's a book, and it's not about petting puppies. You know what I mean? There's some stuff, and I don't want to get canceled. Once I have enough money, and I put that out there, and I don't have to worry about people canceling me, I will publish that book. Say it again? I don't want to get canceled. I want my job. All right. I'm going to move on to my recommendation. My recommendation is people, I love my job. I absolutely love my job. And my recommendation is that you think and you find your passion and you do it, because I want everybody to feel like I feel every morning when they wake up. In conclusion, I told you about 3 points. Point number 1, why I decided to go into speech. Mom talked to me like an adult, and I made 199 on my E5 sergeant exam. Point number 2, my education. I talked about Aristotle's concepts, ethos, logos, and pathos, and I think that I use emotional appeals quite effectively. And my 3rd and final point, my job here at Lee College as a faculty member and the division chair. But I love teaching, first and foremost. My recommendation, or what I want you to take away, is find the job that you love, people. Find a job that you can love, so that you can live a fulfilled, wonderful life. Thank you very much.